Atsumu opened his eyes and found himself in his room in Eiko's house. He had a slight headache and felt incredibly nauseous. He sat up straight and immediately ran to the bathroom because he was feeling worse and worse. He bent over the toilet and threw up. His legs were shaking. He felt like trash. Atsumu flushed the toilet and sat on the floor next to it. Fuck. Suddenly he heard a knock on the door and a dainty voice asking for him. Atsumu, are you okay? Can I come in? Everything's okay. Give me a minute and I'll be right out. Atsumu pulled himself up, rinsed his mouth, and washed his face. He looked at his hand and noticed it was bandaged. What the hell? Atsumu dried himself and looked in the mirror. Shit, he looked pretty beat up. He opened the door and saw Eiko leaning against the wall across from him. She gave him a gentle smile. Hey Eiko. She gave Atsumu a bottle of water and some medicine. Here, take this. Atsumu nodded and swallowed the medicine. Then they both headed towards the living room, where Komori was already waiting for them. Hey Atsumu, are you alright? Atsumu nodded. I'm fine. Where is Omi? In his room. You might want to leave him alone right now. Atsumu looked at Komori in confusion. He could barely remember anything. The last thing he knew was how they ran down the staircase and how he suddenly felt dizzy. After that, blackout. Someone gave you knockout drops. Huh. You should get some rest today. Your body should be fit again in the evening. Atsumu nodded. He was somehow completely overwhelmed with the situation. Kiyoomi brought you both out. You fainted at some point and the situation became pretty dicey as more and more of Seeker's people showed up. Is Omi okay? Yes, don't worry. He's just in a bit of a bad mood. Atsumu nodded. What about Seiki? He was nowhere to be found. We are not sure if he was actually there. Atsumu, you should be careful with your hand. Atsumu frowned and looked at his wounded hand. The cut is deep. It will take a while to heal completely. Atsumu slowly tried to move his fingers, but it hurt like hell. He quietly hissed in pain, but then he smiled faintly. It could have been worse. Eiko and Komori gave Atsumu a worried look. Atsumu stood up, his hands in his pockets. I'm going to check on Omi. Atsumu, I really wouldn't. Atsumu gave Komori a broad smile, which immediately silenced him. He frowned at first, but then smiled weakly back at him and sighed. Atsumu walked out of the living room, leaving Komori and Eiko alone. Eiko looked anxiously after Atsumu and was lost in thoughts of Sakusa until Komori spoke, snapping her out of her thoughts. He's not Yuki. Eiko tore her gaze to Komori, who smiled weakly at her. They must have been thinking the same thing. Eiko relaxed her expression and returned Komori's smile. I wish Kiyoomi could finally get over him. Maybe it's Atsumu who can help him with that. Eiko looked again in the direction Atsumu was going and hummed. Maybe it's Atsumu. Atsumu went to Sakusa's room and saw that the door was slightly open. He looked in and saw Sakusa lying on his back on his bed, legs bent, hands crossed over his forehead and headphones on. He was probably listening to music. Atsumu's heart was pounding. He leaned against the door frame, folded his arms, and looked at him for a while longer. Suddenly Sakusa pulled off his headphones and sighed, not turning his gaze to Atsumu. What are you doing here? Atsumu flinched. Sakusa was now looking in his direction. How the hell get out of here, Miya? Atsumu fell silent. Atsumu. Sakusa raised an eyebrow and looked at him questioningly. It's Atsumu. I don't care. Sakusa lowered his head again and stared at the ceiling. Atsumu pouted. That's rude, Omi. Go away. Atsumu swallowed, his mood now also getting worse thanks to Sakusa. I just wanted to thank you, but the way you're acting right now. Atsumu fell silent as Sakusa stood up and walked towards him. Sakusa grabbed Atsumu's arm and pushed him out of his room. Hey. Before Atsumu could say anything else, Sakusa pulled the door shut behind him, leaving a perplexed Atsumu behind. Atsumu blinked a few times, his mouth open. What the hell? Atsumu frowned. Are you fucking serious, Omi? For the next few days, the mood between Sakusa and Atsumu was quite tense. Sakusa ignored Atsumu and talked, if at all, only the most necessary with him. Atsumu was frustrated by Sakusa's behavior, literally pissed off. In the meantime, Atsumu was feeling a little better, but his hand still hurt a lot, and he was still wearing a bandage in case the wound opened up again. Sakusa was just in the kitchen and cleaned up his dishes. He not only avoided Atsumu, but also Komori and Eiko. Unlike Atsumu, this was somehow almost normal for the two of them. They just lived with it. Atsumu stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his arms crossed in front of his chest as he watched Sakusa. He frowned as Sakusa paid no attention to him and boredly minded his own business. Atsumu was pissed off. "Omi, train with me." Sakusa scoffed, not thinking it would be worth looking at Atsumu. "Why should I? It's been days, and if I want to defend myself better next time, I have to practice. So train with me." Sakusa now turned his gaze to Atsumu and frowned. "Next time. Ask Komori." "Funny. Komori is still injured, you idiot. So are you, smartass." Sakusa walked towards Atsumu and was about to pass him when Atsumu suddenly blocked his way with his arm and looked him deeply in the eyes, his own eyes filled with anger. "Listen, Omi, I don't know what your fucking problem is, but you and I are going to sort it out right here and now." Sakusa pressed his eyebrows together and looked down contemptuously on the smaller one. Atsumu was seething inside. Sakusa clicked his tongue. "TSK. Don't complain when I hurt you." He pushed past Atsumu and walked towards the training room. Atsumu's eyes widened. Not a second later he followed Sakusa. The two of them walked into a hall where there were a few mats on the floor in the middle of the room. They weren't particularly soft, but prevented them from hurting themselves badly if they were to hit the floor. Sakusa and Atsumu faced each other, both looking incredibly annoyed with each other, and got into position. "You will regret this, Miya." Atsumu's blood boiled, and at that moment he really wanted to punch Sakusa in the face. "Make me." Atsumu went after Sakusa and lunged to kick him on his head with his leg. Sakusa's eyes widened, and he grabbed Atsumu's leg to block the kick. "Your technique sucks. No wonder you almost got killed. I saved your fucking life with my technique, Omi, so at least thank me for that." Sakusa frowned, his expression now changing from annoyed to angry. He swatted Atsumu's leg away and was about to land a hit in Atsumu's side, but he managed to dodge it. "I fucking told you not to get involved into my fights. I could have handled them on my own." Atsumu clicked his tongue and went after Sakusa, but Sakusa deflected each of Atsumu's attacks almost with ease. "He would have stabbed you, Omi. If I hadn't stopped his blade, you would have been caught at least as badly as Komori by now. So at least thank me, you ass." Sakusa was unfocused for a moment because of Atsumu's words and conceded a hit from Atsumu. He hit him directly in the face, which made him stagger back a few steps. Sakusa's lower lip began to bleed, and they both panted. Sakusa licked the blood from his lips and gave Atsumu a look of disdain. He whispered, "Bastard." Atsumu frowned even more, anger still written all over his face. He was tired of being treated like this by Sakusa. He wanted to show him that he couldn't act that way with him. "I should thank you. Isn't it thanks enough that I saved your fucking life?" Sakusa charged at Atsumu. Atsumu could only dodge Sakusa's hits with difficulty. "Your shitty frankness, your shitty cockiness, your shitty flirting with your ex. Did it ever occur to you that it was her who gave you the knockout drops?" Atsumu's eyes widened at what Sakusa had just said. He pushed his thoughts about Yachi aside and gave Sakusa an arrogant look. "Are ya jealous, Kiyoomi?" Sakusa inhaled sharply, feeling caught, and Atsumu could also see what was going on with Sakusa. At that moment, Sakusa landed a hit on Atsumu's face, causing his nose and lips to bleed a little. Sakusa was strong, no question. But when he's angry, he was even stronger, and Atsumu did everything he could to make Sakusa really furious. Atsumu smirked and looked deep into Sakusa's eyes. He almost had him. "What the fuck is your problem? I wanted to thank you, and you push me away, ignore me, treat me like I'm dirt. Fuck you, Atsumu." "No, fuck you, Sakusa. Why are you afraid of being helped? Why do ya need to control everything on your own? There are some things that cannot be controlled, Omi." Sakusa flinched. "Talk to me. What is it that scares you so much?" Sakusa's eyes widened at Atsumu's last words and he unconsciously took another shot. At that very moment, Atsumu unknowingly defended himself from the punch with his injured hand, which immediately made him wince in pain. Sakusa took the chance and opened his fist to grab Atsumu's hand and press it even more into his wound. Atsumu cried out in pain and Sakusa took the opportunity to push him to the ground. Atsumu slammed his back and head on the ground. Sakusa now sat on top of him and pinning his hands on the ground next to Atsumu's head. Atsumu hissed in pain and both of them were panting. I was scared as fuck because of you, Atsumu. Sakusa grabbed Atsumu's collar and pulled his upper body up to him. I had no idea what was wrong with you. I had no plan how to save you. I didn't know how we would get out of there alive again. I was scared that you would die, Atsumu. Sakusa gasped for air while Atsumu held his breath and looked at Sakusa with his eyes wide open. Sakusa's expression had meanwhile turned to panic and fear, the anger long gone. Atsumu was speechless. He lowered his gaze by now, strands of hair falling down his face. He spoke in a calm voice. You can't protect all of us by yourself, Omi. Sakusa released his grip on Atsumu and slowly stood up to leave the hall. He was shaking all over his body and in a state of daze. He spoke in a quiet voice. Your hand is bleeding, Atsu. Sakusa pulled the door closed behind him and left Atsumu alone. Tears filled Atsumu's eyes, but he wiped them away before they even had a chance to fall. His whole body ached, but it was worth it. Atsumu smiled weakly. Let me help you, Omi. Let me be by your side. Atsumu walked into the medical room and looked for new bandages. He paused for a moment and looked outside. It was pouring rain, which in a way calmed him down a lot. Eiko passed by the room, but came back when she spotted Atsumu and now peeked inside. Atsumu? Eiko? Can you help me? Atsumu turned to Eiko and lifted up the new bandage. Eiko's eyes widened as she saw what Atsumu looked like. Atsumu? What happened? Geez, you look like a mess. Eiko ran up to Atsumu and looked at him worriedly, but he just giggled. It's fine. Omi and I were just practicing. Practicing? That looks more like a fight to me. It's alright, Eiko. Atsumu gave her a warm smile, but she continued to look at him worriedly. She lowered her eyes, took Atsumu's hand, and then slowly and carefully began to change the bandage. What happened, Atsumu? I still don't quite know what's going on inside Omi, but the emotions that had built up needed to be released. For both of us. Eiko frowned. She continued to treat Atsumu's wound. For some reason, Omi thinks he has to protect all of us alone. He doesn't manage to trust others and eats up all his emotions. He's going to break if he goes on like this. Atsumu was worried, and Eiko knew it. She gave him a weak smile, then gently squeezed his hands. You like him, Atsumu? Huh? Atsumu blushed, his expression a bit surprised. Oh, of course. I want to protect all of you. Omi is just as important to me than you and Komori are. Eiko started to disinfect the wounds in Atsumu's face, which made him quietly hiss in pain. It was burning like hell. Eiko focused her gaze on Atsumu's lips, her brows still pressed together. Atsumu, there is something about Kyo's past that you should know. She finished the treatment and looked Atsumu into his eyes. He was confused and a bit scared of what she would say next. Eiko exhaled deeply. It's about Kiyoomi's ex-boyfriend.